The operating room is too quiet for the man they rush in. Blood on his knuckles. Breath sharp. Eyes scanning exits instead of faces. They call him an off-duty brawler. A problem. A delay to surgery. A temporary nurse steps forward. No raised voice. No panic. Just a hand placed where it shouldn't calm anyone. Monitors spike. A tray rattles. Security is still minutes away. The surgeon hesitates. The patient doesn't. The temp nurse doesn't move back. He closes the doors. Locks them. Alone. Later people will say the man was restrained without force, that the room survived, that someone misjudged who was in charge. They were wrong. The hospital came alive before dawn, not with noise but with movement. Automatic doors slid open and closed. Stretchers rolled across polished floors. Monitors hummed in patient rooms like distant insects. The building breathed on its own schedule, steady and indifferent. Evan Hale entered through the side staff entrance at 5:42. He signed in without looking up. Temporary contract. 2 weeks. Surgical wing. Operating room support. The badge printer spat out his name on cheap plastic. Temp was printed in smaller letters beneath it. He clipped it to his scrub top and adjusted the lanyard so it wouldn't swing when he walked. No one greeted him. That was normal. The surgical locker rooms smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. Evan changed in silence. His movements were precise, economical. Shoes aligned under the bench. Street clothes folded, not stuffed, into the locker. He checked the laces of his clogs, tugged once and stopped. He stood still for a moment, listening. Footsteps outside. A cart rattling. Someone coughing behind a wall. Nothing urgent. Nothing wrong. He stepped out and followed the blue line on the floor toward operating room 3, or 3 was already lit. The overhead surgical lights were off, but the room glowed with a soft white from wall panels and monitors in standby mode. Stainless steel trays sat covered, instruments aligned beneath sterile drapes. A circulating nurse looked up from the schedule tablet. "You're the temp?" "Yes." She glanced at his badge, then his face. Early 40s, maybe. Calm eyes. No hurry in him. "You've done or support before?" "Yes." She nodded once. That was enough. No one wanted a story at this hour. Scrub sink is there. Dr. Kaplan likes his trays exact. Don't move anything unless asked. "I won't." She watched him a second longer than necessary, then went back to her tablet. Evan washed his hands. Long scrub, fingertips first, nails, palms, wrists, elbows. He counted silently, not because he needed to, but because the habit was still there. When he finished, he didn't shake his hands dry. He held them up, water dripping down to his elbows, and waited. The first surgery of the day was routine. Gallbladder, middle-aged patient, no complications expected. Evan stood at the edge of the room, not in the way, not invisible either. He watched how people moved. Who spoke first? Who hesitated? The anesthesiologist rushed. The surgeon was sharp, impatient, already irritated by the early hour. The residents mirrored him, moving faster than necessary, talking more than required. Evan said nothing. When a tray was requested, he passed it smoothly, handle oriented correctly without being told. When a clamp slipped on the tray, he adjusted it before it could fall, catching it with 2 fingers, quiet as breath. No one thanked him. That was fine. Halfway through the procedure, a monitor flickered. Not an alarm, just a brief dimming, then normal. Evan noticed. The circulating nurse did not. He filed it away without comment. The surgery ended without incident. The patient was wheeled out, the room reset. Between cases, Evan cleaned. Not fast, thorough. He wiped under the edges of the table where dust gathered. He checked the wheels, locking and unlocking them once to confirm function. He tested the overhead light articulation gently, noting a slight resistance in the left arm. He didn't report it. Not yet. At 7:18, the charge nurse stepped in. "Or 3 ready?" "Yes," Evan said. She looked at him again. People often did after the second interaction. Something in the way he answered. Not deferential. Not casual. "Name? Hale." She nodded. "You're with us all day?" "Yes." She moved on. The second case was delayed. Then the third. By mid-morning the schedule was already slipping. Stress crept in the way it always did. Voices rising slightly, jokes sharpening into barbs, hands moving faster but missing small things. Evan adjusted without instruction. He shifted trays closer before they were asked for. He repositioned a stool before a surgeon realized he needed it. He stepped back when tension rose, giving space without retreat. During a lull, 2 nurses spoke quietly near the supply cabinet. "Temp's competent," one said. "Yeah," the other replied. "But quiet. Hard to read." Evan pretended not to hear. At 10:02, an alert chimed at the central desk. Not loud, not urgent. A pre-admission notice. Incoming patient. ATA unknown. Classification pending. The charge nurse frowned at the screen. "That's vague." Evan was across the room, replacing sterile packs. He glanced once at the desk monitor, then back to his work. At 10:17, security walked past the OR doors. 2 of them, not running, alert. That was unusual. At 10:23, the anesthesiologist from earlier leaned against the wall near OR3, rubbing his eyes. "Something's coming," he muttered to no one in particular. Evan paused, then continued wiping the counter. At 10:31, the hospital's rhythm changed. It wasn't an alarm, it was subtler than that. Voices down the corridor grew louder. A stretcher rolled fast, wheels rattling. Someone swore under their breath. Evan straightened slowly. The doors at the far end of the surgical wing burst open. A gurney came through, pushed hard by 2 orderlies. On it lay a man in his 30s, broad shoulders straining against restraints that were more symbolic than effective. His hands were cuffed together at the wrists, not hospital restraints, metal standard issue. Blood smeared his knuckles. His eyes were open, too open. They scanned the hallway, not in panic but in assessment. Distance, angles, people, off-duty brawler, someone said quickly. Collapsed outside a gym, internal bleeding suspected. The charge nurse moved forward. "Which OR?" "3, a voice answered. "Only one ready." Evan stepped back to clear the path. As the gurney passed him, the man on it turned his head slightly. Their eyes met, just for a fraction of a second. The man's gaze sharpened, then the gurney rolled on. Evan felt the shift settle into place. The crisis hadn't started yet, but it was close. He checked the doors 2 or 3 as they opened, watched who followed the gurney inside, counted them without moving his lips. 2 orderlies, 1 ER nurse, no security yet. He moved to the side of the room, hands clasped loosely in front of him. The surgeon entered, irritated. "What's this?" "Emergency," the charge nurse said. "Possible ruptured spleen." The patient laughed. It was short, dry, controlled. "I'm fine," he said. His voice was steady, too steady. "Let me up." "No," the anesthesiologist replied, already preparing medication. The man's gaze flicked to him, calculating. Evan watched from the corner. No one noticed how the patient tested the cuffs once, gently, as if measuring the metal. No one noticed how he adjusted his breathing when the mask came close. No one noticed except Evan. The surgeon snapped for instruments. The room grew louder, tighter. The patient's heart rate spiked on the monitor. "Hold him," someone said. The orderlies leaned in. The man flexed. Not hard. Not yet. Evan shifted his weight. Still no one looked at him. Good. This was not his room. Not yet. He stayed quiet and waited. The first sign that the room was slipping did not come from the patient. It came from the monitor. A brief, uneven flutter in the heart rate. Not an alarm, not enough to trigger protocol, just enough to be noticed by someone who was already watching. Evan saw it. He did nothing. The operating room filled the way it always did during an emergency. Too many bodies moving too quickly, each convinced their motion was necessary. The surgeon demanded imaging confirmation. The anesthesiologist argued for sedation. The charge nurse tried to coordinate with radiology over a crackling line. The patient lay still, too still. His chest rose and fell at a measured pace, as if he were counting each breath. His eyes followed hands, not faces, instruments, not voices. Evan stood near the wall-mounted supply cabinet, posture relaxed, hands loose at his sides. He was close enough to intervene if asked, far enough to be forgotten. "BP's climbing," the anesthesiologist said. The patient smiled faintly. "You're wasting time." The surgeon ignored him. "Prep for exploratory. We'll open and see." A resident reached for the restraints to tighten them. Evan's eyes tracked the movement. The resident pulled, metal bit into skin. The patient reacted instantly, not with strength, with timing. He twisted his wrists inward and down, slipping pressure to the chest angle of the cuffs. The metal didn't break. It didn't need to. The sudden shift startled the resident enough to make him step back. "Hey!" The patient laughed again, sharper this time. "Relax," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." His heart rate jumped again. Evan exhaled slowly through his nose. This was not panic. This was control. "Security," the charge nurse called toward the door. On the way, someone answered from the hall. "Not fast enough." The anesthesiologist moved in with a syringe. "You need to stay still." The patient's gaze snapped to the needle. "No," he said. He lifted his head off the gurney. "Not a lot. Just enough." The room froze for half a second. Enough time for Evan to see the angle of the patient's neck, the tension in his jaw, the readiness in his shoulders. This man had been restrained before, often, and not in hospitals. "Sir," the surgeon said, voice hardening, "this isn't optional." The patient's eyes drifted past him. They landed on Evan again. This time they lingered. Recognition flickered, not of identity, but of capability. A predator recognizing another creature that did not behave like prey. Evan did not look away. He also did not challenge the stare. He broke eye contact first, deliberately, as if the moment had meant nothing. The anesthesiologist injected the sedative. The patient's arm jerked. Not away from the needle, toward the anesthesiologist's wrist. Fingers brushed fabric. Close. Too close. "Enough," the charge nurse said. "Hold him." The orderlies moved in again. Evan stepped forward half a pace. No one noticed. He reached the foot of the bed and placed one hand lightly against the metal rail. Not to grip, just to feel the vibration. The patient inhaled, then exhaled sharply. His body went slack. Monitors dipped. "Sedation taking effect," the anesthesiologist said with relief. Evan watched the patient's face. The eyes closed, but the jaw did not loosen. That mattered. The surgeon exhaled and snapped on gloves. "Let's move." The crisis, it seemed, had passed. Evan did not move back. As the team repositioned the patient, Evan adjusted the foot of the bed slightly, aligning it with the room's center. It was a small correction, subtle. It gave him better sightlines to every corner of the oar. He did not announce it. The first incision had not yet been made when the patient's hand moved again. Slowly, deliberately. He curled his fingers inward, testing sensation. Sedation had dulled him, not disabled him. Evan leaned in slightly toward the circulating nurse. His jaws still locked, he said quietly. She glanced at the patient. "Some people react differently." "Yes," Evan replied, "but his breathing hasn't slowed enough." The anesthesiologist looked up. "Vitals are within range." Evan did not argue. He stepped back. The surgeon made the initial cut. Blood welled. The patient's breathing hitched. The monitors responded instantly. Heart rate spiking, oxygen dipping. "Pressure's off," the anesthesiologist said. Adjusting. The patient's eyes snapped open. Wide, focused. He surged upward, not fully, not yet. But enough. The restraints rattled. The gurney shifted. Instruments clinked as a tray slid an inch. The surgeon swore and stepped back. What the hell? "Hold him!" the charge nurse shouted. The orderlies lunged. The patient twisted hard to the left. One orderly lost balance and stumbled into the instrument table. Metal clattered to the floor. The room erupted into noise. Evan moved. He stepped to the side of the bed and placed one hand on the patient's shoulder. Not forceful. Anchoring. "Breathe," Evan said. His voice was low, calm, almost conversational. The patient froze, not because of the word, because of the tone. For the first time, his eyes flicked away from the medical staff and locked fully onto Evan. Up close, the man's face was marked with old scars, not street brawls, training injuries, clean lines, controlled damage. "You," the patient said, breath ragged, "step back." Evan did not. "Lie down," Evan replied. 2 simple words, no command in the voice, just certainty. The patient hesitated. It lasted less than a second, but everyone felt it. The anesthesiologist stared. The surgeon paused mid-motion. The room, without realizing it, waited. The patient lay back. Slowly, the orderlies froze, unsure whether to continue restraining him. Evan removed his hand. He stepped back into his original position. Silence fell in uneven pieces. "Resume," the surgeon said finally, voice tight. No one spoke about what had just happened. They all pretended it had been coincidence. The surgery continued. The patient drifted again, sedation finally pulling him under. But the room did not relax. The monitors steadied, but tension remained thick and unresolved. Evan returned to the wall. He checked the instruments that had fallen, counted them, replaced what was still sterile, set aside what wasn't without comment. The circulating nurse watched him work. "Thank you," she said quietly. Evan nodded once. The surgeon finished the procedure faster than planned. Too fast. He wanted... The man closed and transferred. When the final sutures were placed, the patient stirred again. A low sound escaped his throat, not pain, recognition. Evan met his eyes one last time. The patient's lips curved, not a smile, an acknowledgement. Then his eyes closed. Security arrived as the patient was wheeled out. Too late. 2 officers stood awkwardly at the door, hands on belts, scanning a room that had already survived its storm. Situation resolved, the charge nurse told them. They nodded and left. The OR was reset in silence. The surgeon stripped his gloves and avoided looking at Evan. The anesthesiologist leaned against the counter, shaken. That was unusual, he said. Yes, Evan replied. The man studied him. You've done this before. Evan met his gaze calmly. I work in hospitals. The anesthesiologist snorted softly, unconvinced, but said nothing more. As the room cleared, the circulating nurse lingered. You handled him well, she said. Evan shrugged slightly. He didn't want to hurt anyone. She frowned. You sure about that? Yes, Evan said. If he did, we wouldn't be standing. That unsettled her. He could see it. He checked the overhead light again, adjusting the arm that resisted slightly. He applied just enough pressure to smooth its movement. A temporary fix. Good enough. At 12:04, Evan signed the OR log. No incidents reported. That was a lie, but it was the kind the system preferred. As he left OR3 to prepare for the next case, he felt it, the quiet awareness that something had shifted. The patient was not just dangerous, he was connected to something larger. And now the hospital had noticed the wrong man, not the one on the gurney, the one who D kept the room standing. Evan walked down the corridor, hands relaxed, face neutral. The crisis had not ended. It had only learned where he was. The hospital did not calm after the surgery. It only pretended to. OR3 was cleaned and sealed, its lights dimmed, but the tension that had entered with the patient stayed behind, clinging to corridors and staff alike. People spoke more carefully. Doors closed more softly. No one admitted why. Evan felt it immediately. He moved through the surgical wing with a tray cart, restocking linens, his pace unchanged. To anyone watching, he was just a temporary nurse doing post-op turnover work, useful, replaceable, but his attention had widened. He noted which security officers remained on the floor after the incident, not the usual hospital guards. 2 of them carried themselves differently. Weight slightly forward, eyes active. Radios checked more often than needed. One of them paused when Evan passed. You work here? The guard asked. Yes. Name? Hale. The guard looked at his badge, then at Evan's hands. No tremor, no haste. What department? Surgical. The guard nodded, unsatisfied, then moved on. Evan continued down the corridor. The patient had been transferred to a secured recovery room 2 floors down. Not ICU, not psych, a holding room near imaging, typically used for detainees who needed medical clearance. That choice mattered. At the nurse's station, voices were low and tight. He wasn't drunk, one nurse whispered. Did you see his cuffs? Police issue, another replied. They don't do that for gym fights. Then why bring him here without backup? No one answered. Evan paused at the medication refrigerator, log, ed inventory, and listened without appearing to. The charge nurse approached him with a clipboard. Hale, you're floated for now. Paku needs extra hands. Yes, Evan said. As he turned, she hesitated. You handled yourself well in there, she said quietly. I don't know your background, but thank you. Evan met her eyes. It's part of the job. She studied him for a second, then nodded and walked away. Paku was louder. Controlled chaos. Beeping monitors murmured reassurances, the soft groans of patients waking from anesthesia. Evan took a position near the far wall, assisting when asked, observing always. At 12:47, a nurse at the desk received a call. Her posture changed immediately. Yes, she said. Understood. She hung up and looked around. Security's requesting limited access to recovery, she announced. No visitors until further notice. Murmurs rippled through the room. Evan's gaze drifted to the hallway leading to the secured holding area. 2 men in plain clothes stepped out of the stairwell, not hospital staff. Their jackets were unmarked, but the way they moved was familiar. Controlled, purposeful. They scanned the room once, then approached the desk. The charge nurse met them. Can I help you? One of the men produced an ID briefly. Too fast for anyone else to read. "We're here about the patient from or 3, he said. The charge nurse stiffened. "He's in recovery. Stable. We'll need to speak with whoever was present during the incident." Her eyes flicked, without meaning to, toward Evan. He was already looking away. The man followed her gaze. Their eyes met. This time, Evan did not break contact first. The man frowned slightly. "We'll start with you," he said. Evan walked over calmly. "Yes, name, Hale, role, temporary surgical nurse." The second man studied Evan from the side. "You intervened." Evan's expression didn't change. "I assisted as required. How? By doing my job." A pause. The first man smiled thinly. "You're very calm for someone who just handled a violent detainee." "He was a patient," Evan replied. "Patients react unpredictably under stress." The smile faded. "You restrained him." "No," Evan said. "He restrained himself." That was true. The men exchanged a glance. "Where were you trained?" the second man asked. Evan answered without hesitation. "In hospitals." Another pause. The first man nodded. "We may need a formal statement later." "Of course." They stepped away, turning their attention to the charge nurse and anesthesiologist. Evan returned to his position. The room felt smaller now. At 1312, a shout echoed faintly from down the hall. Not panic, anger. Evan's head turned instantly. Security radios crackled. "Hold position," a voice said. "He's awake. The Brawler." Evan moved toward the hallway before anyone asked him to. Not running, not drawing attention, just drifting closer as if responding to a routine task. 2 guards stood outside the holding room. Inside, voices rose. "I want a lawyer," the patient snapped. "Now, you'll get one," a calm voice replied. "After we talk." Evan stopped at the corner, out of sight. He listened. The patient's breathing was steady again, controlled. He was no longer sedated. That was a mistake. A guard shifted his weight, hand brushing his belt. Evan stepped forward slightly. "You might want to give him space," Evan said quietly. The guard looked at him. Surprised. "This is restricted." "I know," Evan replied. "If you crowd him, he'll escalate." The guard frowned. "You some kind of expert?" Evan didn't answer. The shouting inside the room stopped abruptly. A crash followed. Metal against tile. "Move!" someone shouted. The door burst open. The patient lunged out, one guard stumbling backward as the man twisted free of a grip. Not strength alone. Leverage, timing, awareness. The corridor erupted. Shouts. Footsteps. A guard hit the wall hard. The patient turned and stopped. Evan stood directly in front of him. Close enough to touch. The patient's chest heaved once. Then his expression changed. Not surprise, recognition. "You," he said. Evan raised one hand slightly, not to threaten, to signal pause. "Not here," Evan said. The guards shouted behind him, weapons half-drawn, unsure. The patient's eyes flicked past Evan, measuring distances, exits, angles, then back. "You shouldn't be in this building," the patient said quietly. Evan's voice was lower still. "Neither should you." A beat. The patient exhaled slowly. His shoulders dropped a fraction. Just enough. Evan stepped closer and spoke so only he could hear. "If you run," Evan said, "they'll hurt people who don't deserve it." The patient's jaw tightened. "And if I stay?" "You live," Evan replied. Quietly. For a long moment nothing moved. Then the patient turned and placed his hands behind his back, voluntarily. The guards rushed in, cuffing him again, rougher this time. As they dragged him away, the patient looked back once. "You're not hospital," he said. Evan didn't respond. The corridor emptied slowly. People stared at Evan now. Nurses, technicians, security, no one applauded. No one spoke. The charge nurse approached, pale. "What are you?" she asked softly. Evan met her eyes. "Tired," he said. She didn't believe him. Neither did the men in plain clothes watching from the end of the hall. The crisis had escalated. And now, there was no pretending this was just medicine. They moved the patient back into the holding room with more force than necessary. That, too, was a mistake. Evan stood where he was as the guards disappeared down the corridor, their boots loud against the tile. He did not follow, he did not rush to explain. He let the moment settle, because moments like this always did. People filled silence with assumptions. The charge nurse spoke first. "Lock this wing," she said, voice tight. "No transfers without clearance." Security complied. Doors sealed with muted clicks. The hospital did not announce it. It never did. It simply narrowed. One of the plainclothes men approached Evan again, closer this time. Too close for comfort, by design. "You talk to detainees like you've done it before," he said. Evan didn't step back. "I talk to people." "You positioned yourself between him and armed guards." "Yes. Why?" Evan considered the question. "Because if they had moved first, someone would be injured." The man studied him. "You certain of that?" "Yes." A pause stretched. "You didn't ask who we are." "I don't need to." That earned Evan a longer look. The second man joined them. "We've requested your employment history." Evan nodded. "You'll find hospitals." "That's all?" "Yes." The man's jaw tightened slightly. "Background checks don't usually come back this clean." Evan said nothing. The charge nurse returned, clipboard pressed. Tight to her chest. "We're rerouting surgeries. Paku is stable. What's happening?" The plainclothes man turned to her. "We're assuming temporary control of this wing." She bristled. "On what authority?" He showed the badge again. "Longer this time. Long enough." Her shoulders dropped. Understood. Evan watched the exchange carefully. Authority had entered the room, not loudly, but decisively. The holding room door down the hall rattled once. A controlled impact, not a struggle. A signal. Evan turned his head slightly, listening. Inside, the patient spoke in a low voice. Words indistinct, calm. He was not testing restraints. He was testing responses. The second man followed Evan's gaze. "He knows you," he said. "He recognizes control," Evan replied. The man frowned. "You keep answering like that." Evan met his eyes. "Because that's what he responds to." A radio crackled. "Subject is compliant," a guard reported. For now, the plainclothes man echoed. He looked at Evan again. "We need you nearby." "That's not my assignment," Evan said. "It is now." This was the moment, the first true containment, not of the patient, of the situation. Evan nodded once. "Where?" "Outside the room." "You don't engage unless we ask." Evan considered, then answered. "I'll engage if I have to." The man didn't argue. They walked together down the corridor. The holding room was small, bare, a bed bolted to the floor, camera in the corner, 2 guards inside now, standing farther back than before. The patient sat upright, cuffed to the frame, posture relaxed, his eyes lifted when Evan appeared. "I was wondering when they'd figure it out," the patient said. "Quiet," a guard snapped. "Evan, stop." Ped, just outside the door frame. The patient's gaze never left him. "They don't know who you are," the patient said. "But they know you're a problem." Evan said nothing. "You didn't ask my name," the patient continued. "I don't need it," Evan replied. The patient smiled faintly. "That's what I said." One of the guards shifted, uncomfortable. The plainclothes men observed from behind Evan. "This ends one of 2 ways," the patient said. "Either you walk away and they make this worse, or you stay and they listen." "That's not your decision," one of the men said sharply. The patient laughed softly. "You think you're in charge because you're standing?" Evan spoke before the tension snapped. "Enough," he said. Not loud, not aggressive. The word landed anyway. The patient's smile faded. Evan stepped 1 foot into the room. The guard stiffened. "I'm not here for you," Evan said to the patient. "I'm here to keep this contained." The patient studied him carefully. "Then you already know why I'm here." "Yes." "Then you know they brought me to the wrong place." "Yes." The silence that followed was heavy. The plainclothes men exchanged a look. "What does he mean?" one of them asked. Evan didn't answer immediately, because answers created momentum. Momentum created mistakes. They escalated outside your control, Evan said finally. "This building can't handle what follows if you keep pushing." The man bristled. "We're trained for—" "No," Evan said calmly. "You're trained for extraction. This isn't that—" The patient nodded. "He's right." "Shut up," a guard said. Evan raised a hand slightly. The guard stopped speaking, not because he was ordered, because the room had shifted again. "Mo." "V him," Evan said. "Sedate lightly. Enough to keep him present, not compliant. Remove restraints from the bed and replace them with soft cuffs. Give him dignity." The guard stared. That's against protocol, one said. It's the only protocol that works here, Evan replied. The plainclothes man hesitated, then nodded once. Do it. The guards complied reluctantly. The patient watched the process with interest. You just took control, he said to Evan. No, Evan replied. I prevented you from doing it. The patient's eyes gleamed. Same thing. As the adjustments were made, Evan stepped back out of the room. He leaned against the wall, arms loose at his sides. His breathing remained steady. Inside, the patient settled. Outside, authority had quietly rearranged itself. No announcements, no recognition, just containment. For now, the wing went silent in layers. First, the alarms stopped. Then the phones, then the casual foot traffic that made a hospital feel alive. Access doors slid shut one by one, their magnetic locks engaging with a sound too soft to notice unless you were listening for it. Evan heard every one. He stood outside the holding room, back to the wall, arms loose, posture neutral. Anyone passing would see a nurse on standby. Nothing more. Inside the room, the patient sat upright on the bed, soft cuffs now securing his wrists. He tested them once, gently, then stopped. His breathing slowed, his shoulders dropped. That mattered. The plainclothes men stood a few feet away from Evan, speaking in low voices into their radios. This wing is contained, one said. Medical staff only. No external movement. A reply crackled back. Evan caught fragments. Delay. Coup. Ordination. Authority unclear. That mattered too. The hospital did not like uncertainty. Neither did agencies. A nurse approached hesitantly. Do we still run labs? Yes, Evan said before anyone else could answer. She looked at him, startled. He's not cleared. He will be, Evan replied. Baseline labs. Slowly. One person in the room at a time. She glanced at the plainclothes men. They nodded. She moved off quickly, relief mixed with confusion. One of the men turned to Evan. You're giving orders again. Evan didn't look at him. I'm maintaining stability. That's not your role. Evan finally met his gaze. It is if you want him alive and this building intact. The man held his stare, then looked away. A guard inside the room shifted his stance, moving closer to the patient. Evan's voice carried, calm and precise. Step back. The guard hesitated. 2 steps, Evan added. The guard obeyed. The patient watched the exchange with quiet interest. You're closing the box, the patient said. That's dangerous. It's necessary, Evan replied. For who? For everyone else. The patient tilted his head slightly. Including you? Evan didn't answer. A stretcher rolled faintly in the distance. Somewhere else in the hospital, someone was being prepped for surgery. Life continued around the sealed wing, unaware. That separation was fragile. The charge nurse returned, face tight. Administration wants an update. They'll get one when this stabilizes, one of the plainclothes men said. She crossed her arms. They don't like being shut out. Evan spoke quietly. Then tell them this is a safety pause, not a takeover. She looked at him. And if they ask who authorized it? Evan C. On-sided. Say patient behavior necessitated medical containment. That's vague. It's accurate. She studied him, then nodded. All right. She left. The patient laughed softly. You're good at this. At what? Managing people who think they're in charge. Evan's eyes stayed on the door. You're not helping. I'm not trying to, the patient replied. I'm observing. A pause. They sent the wrong team for me, the patient continued. That's why you're here now. Evan turned his head slightly. I'm here because you lost control, the patient smiled. No, I allowed it. The plainclothes men stiffened. Evan didn't. That distinction matters to you, Evan said, not to the outcome. Another radio crackled, louder this time. Change of status, a voice said. External interest confirmed. Requests incoming. The words landed heavily. One of the men cursed under his breath. Evan closed his eyes briefly. This was the point of no return. Lock the stairwells, Evan said. The man snapped his head toward him. We can't now, Evan said, voice still calm. Before someone panics and forces entry. A beat, then the man spoke into his radio. Lock stairwells. Level 3 and 4 only. The clicks followed seconds later. The patient exhaled slowly. You're committing. I already did, Evan replied. A nurse entered the holding room to draw blood. Her hand shook. Evan stepped forward slightly. Focus on your task, he said gently. He won't move. She nodded, eyes on Evan rather than the patient, and did her job. The patient remained still, because he chose to. When the nurse left, the patient spoke again. They'll come harder next. Yes, Evan said. And you won't be allowed tea. Oh, stay invisible. Evan said nothing. The plainclothes man lowered his radio. They're escalating jurisdiction. Evan nodded. Then we slow everything down. How? By making this a medical problem, Evan replied. Not a tactical one. The man frowned. That won't hold. It doesn't need to hold forever, Evan said. Just long enough. The patient's eyes sharpened. Long enough for what? Evan met his gaze fully now. For the right people to arrive, Evan said. The room went still. The patient's smile faded. You're not one of them, he said carefully. Evan's voice remained even. No. But you know them. Yes. Outside the wing, footsteps approached. Multiple, controlled, deliberate. Evan straightened slightly. The doors remained locked. For now, the crisis had shifted again, from chaos to a standoff built on quiet authority and locked doors. The footsteps stopped outside the sealed wing. That was the first complication. If this had been routine, they would have announced themselves. Authority liked noise when it expected compliance. Silence meant assessment. Silence meant recalculation. Evan stood just inside the corridor, his shoulder near the wall, eyes forward. He did not move toward the doors. He did not retreat. Inside the holding room, the patient noticed the change immediately. They were not hospital, he said quietly. No, Evan replied. Different weight in their steps. Yes. The patient smiled faintly. That means you misjudged the clock. Evan didn't respond. Timing was never perfect. It was managed. A voice came through the intercom. Calm, measured. This is Federal Protective Services. We're requesting access to the wing. The plainclothes men stiffen. D1 reached for the wall panel, then stopped. Evan raised a hand slightly. Not to block. To slow. Request acknowledgement, Evan said quietly. The man hesitated, then pressed the button.
This wing is under medical containment. Patient is unstable.
A pause followed. Understood, the voice replied. We'll wait. That was worse. Waiting meant leverage. The patient exhaled slowly. They're adapting. Yes, Evan said. And you're running out of options. Evan finally turned fully toward him. No, I'm narrowing them. The patient studied his face. You're betting they won't risk collateral. They won't, Evan said. Not in a hospital. The patient chuckled softly. You'd be surprised what people risk when embarrassed. A nurse hurried down the corridor breathless. There's a disturbance in ICU. They're pulling stuff. That was the second complication. Evan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. They're creating pressure elsewhere, the patient said. Classic. The plainclothes man swore under his breath. They're forcing us to choose. No, Evan said. They're forcing us to stay. How? The man demanded. By keeping this contained, Evan replied. If this wing stays calm, they can't justify escalation. The intercom crackled again. We're receiving reports of secondary instability. We need to resolve this primary situation. Evan stepped closer to the panel. This is the resolution, he said evenly. Patient is sedated. No threat to staff. That's not what our sources indicate. Your sources are wrong, Evan replied. Another pause. The patient watched Evan closely now. No amusement left, only calculation. You're lying for me, he said. For the building, Evan lied. And if they force entry? Evan didn't answer immediately, because that was the cost. Finally, he said, then I'll be visible. The patient's eyes narrowed. That would solve their problem. Yes, Evan said. But not yours, no. The plainclothes men looked at Evan sharply. One of them shook his head. You can't do that. Evan's voice stayed calm. I can. That kind of authority. I'm not using authority, Evan said. I'm using accountability. The intercom clicked again. We're preparing to override the locks. Evan closed his eyes briefly. This was the moment every quiet operator tried to avoid, the moment where restraint demanded payment. Open the holding room, Evan said. The guards looked at him in disbelief. What? Remove the cuffs, Evan continued. Now. The patient blinked once. That's bold. It's controlled, Evan replied. You'll stand, you won't move. You won't speak unless I tell you to. The guards hesitated. The plainclothes man swallowed. If he bolts, he won't, Evan said. The patient looked at Evan for a long second, then nodded. The cuffs were removed. The patient stood slowly, deliberately, hands at his sides. Evan stepped into the room and positioned himself half a pace in front of him. Not shielding, aligning. Footsteps began again outside the wing, louder this time. They are coming, the patient said softly. Yes, Evan replied. And now? Evan reached up and adjusted the patient's hospital gown, straightening it, hiding the restraint marks. Now, Evan said, you look like a patient. The doors at the far end of the corridor began to unlock. Metal slid back. People entered. Evan didn't move. He stood between the approaching ortho, Ritty and the man they wanted, not with force, with responsibility, and everyone in the room understood the price he was about to pay. The doors opened without drama. No shouting, no rushing boots, just controlled entry, practiced restraint. Men and women in neutral jackets stepped into the corridor and stopped when they saw Evan. They had expected chaos. Instead, they found stillness. Evan stood in front of the patient, his posture relaxed, hands visible, eyes steady. The patient stood behind him, silent, compliant, looking exactly like what he was meant to look like, a man under medical care. This area is under federal control, the lead agent said. Evan nodded once. It's under medical containment. The agent's eyes flicked past Evan to the patient. Step aside. Evan didn't move. This man is recovering from emergency surgery, Evan said calmly. Any extraction right now risks internal bleeding and neurological damage. We have clearance, the agent replied. Evan met his gaze, then use it after a physician clears him. A pause followed. The agent looked around. Nurses stood frozen. Guards waited. Everyone was watching. You're a temporary nurse, the agent said. You don't outrank me. That's true, Evan replied. But I outrank the consequences if you're wrong. The patient shifted his weight slightly. Evan felt it. He spoke without turning. Don't. The patient stilled. That small exchange did more than any badge could have. The agent noticed. Who are you? He asked. Evan considered the question. This was the line. Answering it would end the quiet. Refusing it would escalate the force. Evan chose the third option. I'm the person responsible for this wing. Write no. W, he said. If you proceed against medical advice, that responsibility stays with you. The agent's jaw tightened. A doctor stepped forward, voice shaking. He's right. The patient needs observation, at least 6 hours. The agent looked at the doctor, then back at Evan. 6 hours, the agent said slowly. Then he's ours. Evan nodded. Agreed. The patient exhaled softly. The tension broke, not loudly, but enough. The agent stepped back. Radios murmured. Orders were revised. No one apologized. No one thanked Evan. That was the cost. As the agents withdrew, one of them lingered. You know this won't stay quiet, he said to Evan. Evan nodded. It never does. The agent lowered his voice. When this surfaces, you'll be exposed. Yes, Evan replied. And him? Evan glanced back at the patient. He already is. The agents left. The doors closed again. The wing breathed. The patient sat back down on the bed, slowly, carefully. You crossed it, he said. The line you didn't want to. Yes, you chose me. Evan shook his head. I chose the people who work here. The patient studied him for a long moment. Then you're worse than they think, he said. You're dangerous. Evan didn't argue. A nurse approached. Vitals are stable. Good, Evan said. Resume observation. As the room settled, Evan felt the weight arrive. He had delayed the machine, but machines always collected their debts. He leaned against the wall, eyes heavy, knowing the quiet was borrowed time, and that when it ended he would not be protected by silence anymore. The hospital wing was quiet, but the quiet was heavy. Evan leaned against the wall outside the holding room, eyes scanning the monitors, check-in. G, each sensor with precision. Every beep, every flicker of a light, every breath in the corridor mattered. The patient inside the room sat upright, hands resting gently on his knees, watching Evan with an intensity that felt like assessment, not of authority, but of character. The moral choice had arrived. It wasn't about procedure, protocol, or clearance. It was about the people in the wing, the nurses, the techs, the patients in adjacent rooms, the unsuspecting staff who could be caught in the next misstep. The plainclothes agents stepped closer. One of them spoke, voice measured. "We can override containment. Extraction is authorized. You're standing in the way." Evan exhaled slowly, a deliberate pause before speaking. "And if you do, someone dies." The agent stiffened. "Collateral?" "Yes." "Innocence in the crossfire," Evan said. "You see him as the problem. He sees you as a problem. Neither sees the consequences outside this wing." A nurse peeked from the corridor, face pale. She looked at Evan, silently asking what to do. Evan gave her the slightest nod. "Stay back. Stay calm." The patient spoke without turning. "They'll make you choose, won't they?" "I already have," Evan said. "I protect this place first, authority second." The agent's hand twitched toward the door panel, then hesitated. "You're risking your career for what? A man we've detained? He's not just a man," Evan said quietly. "And this isn't about careers." Time slowed. Every sound, the faint hum of air filters, distant footsteps, the soft beep of monitors, was magnified. The patient's eyes flicked to Evan. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Approval? A warning? It didn't matter. Evan made his choice. He stepped forward, positioning himself fully between the approaching agents and the patient. Calm, neutral, resolved. "This wing stays medical," he said. "Not tactical, not for your authority, not for your clearance, not until I say otherwise." The agents exchanged glances. One hand hovered over a radio. The patient finally spoke, softer this time. "You just took responsibility for me. For all of us." "Yes," Evan replied. "And I'll pay the cost if it comes." The moral weight was palpable. Every agent, every nurse, every observer in the wing felt it. Evan's quiet authority carried no badge, no weapon, no title, only clarity, only consequence. One of the agents exhaled sharply, lowering his hand. "Fine," he said. "You hold it. For now." "Now we stabilize," Evan said. "Then we extract the problem quietly, without risk." The patient's lips curved faintly. "You're the rare kind. Dangerous because you're careful." Evan didn't respond. Careful wasn't a compliment. It was survival. The nurses returned to their duties, reassured by Evan's silent control. The patient remained seated, still and compliant, the soft cuffs a reminder of boundaries rather than punishment. Evan moved back slightly, checking the monitors again. Heart rate stable, blood pressure steady, oxygen normal. He adjusted and 4 lines, straightened a bedsheet, aligned a pillow. Subtle actions, quiet competence. Another radio crackled. Outside the wing, instructions were coming in. Coordination, backup, contingencies. Evan ignored it. His responsibility was here, in this corridor, in this room, in this moment. The moral choice was made, not loudly, not publicly, not even acknowledged, but everyone in the wing understood. It. The cost would come later. For now, the right decision was living quietly, keeping others alive, maintaining control without fanfare. The patient finally leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You're tired," he said. "Yes," Evan replied, "but still capable." A subtle acknowledgement passed between them. No words were needed. The moral line had been drawn, quietly, heavily, correctly. The hospital, for now, would survive because one underestimated nurse had taken the burden of consequence onto himself. The corridor hummed with tension. Footsteps approached from both ends. Some hurried, some measured. Staff whispered to one another behind closed doors. The patient sat upright on the bed, his gaze fixed on Evan. Calm, controlled, waiting. Evan moved closer to the patient, aligning himself with precision. Not a guard, not a threat, a buffer. Every step, every breath calculated. The plainclothes agents returned, this time with additional personnel. Their demeanor had changed. They were confident. They had authority, clearance, and numbers. "You've held them off long enough," the lead agent said. "It's time to move him." Evan did not flinch. "Not until he's ready. Extraction now will risk more than you know." The patient tilted his head, observing the standoff. "He's right," he said softly. The agent's hand twitched toward the radio. "Then I'll authorize force if necessary." Evan's eyes locked on his. "Do it, and the consequences fall on you. I've already borne the responsibility for this wing." The agent hesitated. The others behind him shifted. Even with numbers, authority, and intent, there was a pause, a recognition of something larger than protocol. The patient's voice broke the silence. "I don't need to fight. You know that now." Evan nodded. "I'm here to ensure that." A subtle movement. A glance. Evan's hand brushed against the patient's shoulder lightly. Not a grip, not a push. A simple anchor. Enough to convey presence, authority, and restraint. The patient inhaled, exhaled, Compliance, not forced but chosen. The agents exchanged glances. Numbers alone could not dictate the room. Strategy, patience, and understanding had shifted the balance. The lead agent finally spoke, voice low. "We'll follow your lead, for now, but know this, your window is closing." Evan replied evenly, "I know, and I will step aside when it is safe. Until then, no one is at risk under my watch." The patient's lips curved faintly. "You're the kind they underestimate. Dangerous because you're quiet." Evan didn't respond. Words were unnecessary. The presence alone was enough. The room held its breath. Staff, agents, and the patient, all waiting. Then slowly, the patient leaned back, settling into the bed. A subtle signal. The extraction would happen, but on Evan's terms. Controlled, safe, quiet. Evan exhaled, not relief but acknowledgement. The final confrontation had not been violence, shouting, or chaos. It had been mastery of consequence, calculation, and restraint. Outside, the hospital hummed with life, oblivious to the quiet storm that had just passed. Inside, the patient lay restrained but unharmed, staff reassured, and the plainclothes agents recalibrating their expectations. Eva. N stepped back against the wall, hands loose at his sides. Eyes scanned the monitors, the room, the corridors. He did not celebrate. He did not gloat. The confrontation had ended, but the cost, quiet, invisible, heavy, was already settled in his shoulders, in the line between right and safe, in the weight of responsibility carried silently. No one would recognize it, no one would praise it. That was the point. The quiet power remained, unseen but undeniable. The wing was quiet again, not the ordinary quiet of a hospital corridor between shifts. This was the heavy kind, the kind that settles after chaos, after stakes are measured, and after lives are balanced on decisions no one else sees. Evan moved slowly through the wing, checking monitors, adjusting 4 lines, straightening bed linens. His hands were steady, his posture calm. The world might call him a temporary nurse, a floater, someone unnoticed, but in this wing he had carried authority heavier than badges, louder than radios, and deeper than any protocol. The patient lay in the bed, breathing evenly, wrists free, dignity preserved. No one outside this room would know what had almost happened, or how quietly it had been prevented. The plainclothes agents had left. Their instructions remained vague, their reports cautious. They had extracted the problem without incident, but they would carry a quiet awareness that someone in this hospital had shifted the balance of control without a weapon, without orders, without recognition. Nurses whispered to one another at the station. "Who is he?" "Temporary staff," one replied. "But different," Evan overheard but said nothing. He returned to the supply room, restocked equipment, and filed logs. Everything normal, everything routine. A day continued as if nothing had occurred. The patient's eyes followed him briefly. A nod passed between them. Not a thanks, not a recognition, just acknowledgement. Quiet understanding. Evan's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from administration. "Please submit your report on the incident." He read it, typed a few clinical notes and sent it. No commentary, no detail beyond the medical facts. Everything else, the restraint, the negotiation, the silent authority, was invisible in paper. He stepped out into the corridor. Staff passed, unaware of the danger that had walked these halls just hours before. Evan paused. He looked down the long stretch of corridor, lights reflecting softly on the polished floor, monitors beeping faintly, the hum of air circulation constant and indifferent. This was the aftermath. No glory, no applause, no acknowledgement, just life continuing. He straightened his scrubs, adjusted his mask, and walked toward the next room. One patient at a time. One crisis quietly managed at a time. The weight of decisions remained, but he carried it lightly. Unseen, unrecognized, necessary. The hospital never knew. And that was exactly as it should be. The quiet authority remained. The wing was safe. The patient was safe, and Evan, temporary nurse, underestimated, invisible, continued his watch without fanfare, without recognition, and without error. Because in this world the strongest power was restraint, the heaviest responsibility was silence, and the truest authority was earned unseen and unspoken.